20 years, nearly 1,000 episodes on this show. And starting today, we're going to try something a little different. This season 21, is about the decisions that actually determine whether innovation lives or dies inside any organization. The real calls, not the fluff stuff we read in, academic textbooks, but actually putting you in the rooms where these decisions are happening. What went right? What went wrong? Now, my objective is to expose you to the patterns in innovation decisions so that you can recognize them. Recognize them in yourself, in the people you need to influence, long before you step into any landmines. So, let's get into it. Making generational decisions on innovation investment can be a make or break moment. What I refer to as a CLM, career limiting move. In my case, it started with a chance conversation with Mark Hurd, HP's CEO. Now, let me take you back to 2005. HP's headquarters is on Page Mill in Palo Alto, referred to as Building 25. Top floor is where all of the executive offices were, and that's where Mark's office was at. I was up there doing some meetings and got snagged by Mark. Now, Mark had a reputation. He's a big numbers guy. He believed in what he referred to as extreme benchmarking. You tore into your competitors' numbers. You knew your numbers in and out. Now, others had warned me about this. I had not spent a lot of time with Mark after he joined. This was like right after he took over as CEO. But others had warned me. He had a famous quote that everybody shared, which was, stare at the numbers long enough, and they will eventually confess. Mark believed you could not lead a critical role at HP. It didn't matter whether it was sales, CTO function, division, customer care. It didn't matter. You could not lead a critical role at HP if you did not know your numbers cold, inside and out. And Mark tested everyone on the leadership team, and not just leadership team. He would randomly stop employees and ask for their numbers based on what group they worked in. And it was nonstop. It was constant, to the point where support staff literally would be constantly preparing briefing books for managers, VPs, leaders to make sure they had the latest numbers just in case they got nabbed by Mark. Now, in my case, I happened to be walking past Mark's office. Mark waves me in. I go in, sit down, and he immediately starts drilling me on the CTO numbers. Now, the number he focuses in on was R&D as a percentage of revenue. Now, if you've been any kind of a listener of this show, you know my opinion of that as a metric. R&D as a percentage of revenue is a BS number. It is absolutely meaningless. However, every public company CEO that is what I would call an innovation-dependent company, all the tech companies and AI companies and even automotive, and they live by this number. It's a number that Wall Street looks at. You have to report it as part of your quarterlies. While you report your R&D number, then it's a easy math to get to R&D as a percentage of revenue. Now, like I said, it's a bogus metric. It's non-predictive. It's been proven to be non-predictive. I've talked about this many times, but here I am in my first encounter with Mark back in 2005. Mark was focusing specifically on the PC group at HP. Now, when he grilled me, he asked, so what's HP's number? Well, HP's number at the time for the PC group was about 1.5%. So R&D was 1.5% of the revenue for the PC group. Acer which was a competitor, was at 0.8%, less than 1%, half of HP's. Interesting point of fact, Apple was at 4. Now, Mark's question, and he was really pounding on me on this, which was, how do we get our ratios in line with Acer? So basically he was saying, how do we cut costs so that our R&D expense as a percentage of revenue was equal to Acer at 0.8? Now, this just exemplifies the whole issue of choosing bad metrics. Now, I'm going to quote somebody who I think was probably one of the most insightful leaders in the business world. That's Charlie Munger. And if you've ever watched any of his talks and speeches or whatever, he had a really strong opinion on certain metrics. And one of them was EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And Charlie, I won't use the word because we use the clean flag on the podcast, so we get listed at Apple and others. But Charlie Munger referred to EBITDA as BS earnings. It's a metric that, Wall Street swore by, and Munger said it hid more than it revealed. R&D as a percentage of revenue is the same problem in a different disguise. R&D as a percentage of revenue is the metric that makes every company look like it's investing when all it's doing is spending. Mark was using a broken instrument to make a generational decision. If you make decisions based on R&D as a percentage of revenue, and then you do BS comparisons like, let's make our numbers look like Acer, which means you're going to gut out R&D, that's generational. You will destroy a company over the next 10 to 20 years before you can even have a hope of rebuilding that capability. Now, I looked at him and said, whoa, why aren't we raising our R&D spend to match Apple? Now, Mark didn't hesitate. Here's the quote. He said to me, "We are not Apple, and we never will be." Now, I took offense at that. I was offended that he wouldn't even contemplate it. And I pushed back, and I pushed back hard. I argued we could be Apple in the areas where we had genuine advantage. For example, go back to September 2004. We're talking about a year before my meeting here with Mark. Carly Fiorina was the CEO. Carly had just handed Steve Jobs access to the retail shelf space HP spent 30 years building. Just to put it in context, at that time, HP controlled about 9.5% of all retail shelf space for consumer electronics. The largest single entity having access to the stocking slots, the shelf space for consumer electronics. It was huge. Now, where did that all come from? That all traces back to calculator days in the 70s. Now, Apple was launching the iPod. It had no retail access. That's not a channel that Apple had formed. And rather than HP taking advantage for its own self, it actually opened the door and allowed Apple to come in. And that's how the iPod got traction, bought Apple time to then build out its own retail strategy, which ultimately allowed Apple to be where it is today. Now, so in that case, that was what I would view as one of many advantages that HP had. And when I tried to push back on him saying we could be better with good investment, it didn't land. Mark just didn't believe it. He viewed that the business was a commodity. So you manage a commodity business by managing forward expenses. Now, there was no decision made that day, but something shifted in me. That was the first of many monthly arguments that I had with Mark, and they were nonstop. And what it did is it drove me to begin looking for better metrics. I was getting traction on a few different metrics we were testing because we had the history of being able to go all the way back to the 1940s with HP's numbers. We had the entire access to the deep dive of one of the leading companies in Silicon Valley in order to derive the metrics. As we were going through this process of looking at the metrics, and I was actually getting Mark to align, and I was getting the HP board to align, what happens? Mark gets removed as the CEO, and the board hires Leo to come in. You can go listen and watch other episodes if you're interested in that story. Then Meg kicked Leo out, and she took over as CEO. Then the split of HP into two companies. Acer today, still, it's rough. Today it's about 0.9%. 20 years later, that's exactly where Mark wanted HP to get to. So, if I'm being honest about what I would do differently in this whole exercise, I had the right argument. I had the wrong language. The job wasn't to prove Mark wrong. Nobody changes their mind when they're being told they're wrong. I needed to stop speaking CTO and start speaking CEO. Meet him where he was. Make the case in the language of margin, risk, competitive position, the language he already trusted. But there was no such language when it came to R&D and innovation. It's the reason I spent the rest of my career building something better. And that is what this season is about. That conversation with Mark sent me looking. If R&D as a percentage of revenue was the wrong metric, and I believe to my core that it was and is, then the question is, what's the right one? We went back through HP's own numbers. We backcasted all the way back to the 40s, looking at the numbers by division, by the overall organization, and then something unexpected happened. The archive team at HP gave me access to Bill Hewlett and David Packard's original notebooks. What I found in there pointed me somewhere nobody had thought to look at in decades. In the next episode, we're going to talk about the metrics that actually tell the truth when it comes to R&D and innovation. Now, if this episode gave you some insights, shifted something, share it with somebody who you think needs to hear it, particularly when you're trying to fight senior leaders around R&D investment. And in the comments below, tell me, what's that one benchmark that you are required to have to hit and yet you've never questioned? Is it the right benchmark? Have you really looked at it? I genuinely would like to know. Show notes and this week's studio notes are over at philmckinney.com. Subscribe there. And that's where the deeper analysis lives every Monday that we post. Subscribe. You don't want to miss the next one. And I'll see you in the next episode.